What are some health developments for the Dolphins 2024 season that could potentially make or break this upcoming year? We're exploring that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Cal Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a booster bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We have some news. We have some NFL-related news. We have some Dolphin-specific news, a player signing as players report to training camp today. But I wanted to start today's show as we wait for kind of the meaningful developments and player interviews and player availabilities and updates on contract negotiations and all that stuff kind of starts to come out. I reflect on this time last year where I hopped on the plane and I flew down to South Florida. And as I was driving to the airport, the news happens that Jalen Ramsey suffers an injury with an inadvertent collision with Tyreek Hill at practice that cost him the first half of his first season in Miami. And then it got me thinking about the other injury developments the Dolphins had at other position rooms along the way. And what it left me with was like this kind of very staunch, like, if you could tell me I could sign up for these handful of things right now, I would take them. And that is a reality of every NFL season is there's going to be injuries. Every team is going to have to deal with adversity. Miami got slapped with that with the Shaq Barrett retirement this past weekend already, right, with an unexpected personnel change. But if you told me I could sign on the dotted line right now to get these handful of player health developments for this season, I would take it, and I would take my chances with everything else that would fall. And I wanted to do that, and then we can get into Emmanuel Ogbah signing a one-year contract with the Dolphins and get into the NFL mulling an 18-game schedule, which is kind of making its latest push as 23 teams report to training camp today. So groups and guys to stay healthy. If you told me it would happen at quarterback and I could sign on the dotted line and I could only get 3 things to sign on the dotted line for a health perspective, yeah, having your starting quarterback for the entirety of the season, like the Dolphins did last year, is something that obviously would be on that short list. You had almost 70 quarterbacks take starts in the league last year. It's just an obscene number of quarterbacks that had to get tapped into to start games for NFL teams, and more quarterbacks played than that. That stability at that position, especially as the Dolphins are mulling what kind of financial commitment they do or ultimately don't want to make with Tua in a long-term contract, having that answer kind of given to you if you can have consecutive seasons of full play, I think gives you a lot more peace of mind for the stability of whatever you'd be signing yourself up for, assuming the Dolphins do get a contract done, which we are still waiting on report day. I would go offensive line, but I'd spare. I wouldn't get too greedy. If you could tell me I could sign on the dotted line and I could get 12 plus games of the same interior trio starting for Miami, I would sign on the dotted line and I would take that. No questions asked, right? That's not too greedy. It's 3/4 of the season with the same guys at left guard, center, right guard. If you give me stability inside, because you have depth at tackle. Kendall Lamb has to play 6 games for Teron Armstead. I'd say, okay, it's not great. You'd like to have Teron Armstead, but Kendall Lamb has built some trust, or he should, in your opinion and eyes as a fan, have built some trust with the way he played last year. I do think Patrick Paul has the opportunity to carve out a nice 6th offensive lineman role, and if he has to play, I'd love to get the opportunity to see him play. You don't want to see the guys in front of him get hurt. But I'm really fascinated about what that long-term projection looks like. I'm fascinated to see what his tools look like in this scheme. So I'm not going to get greedy and say, give me the entire offensive line all season long. But if you told me you'd have even a modest level of stability on the interior, which they did not have last year, between Robert Jones starting on IR, between uh, Connor Williams popping the hamstring against Denver, between uh, Isaiah Wynn presumably popping his quad on the first possession against Philadelphia. Robert Hunt goes down against New England. Connor comes back, gets hurt again. Robert comes back, gets hurt again. Liam Eichenberg gets hurt and has to play. Give me stability on the interior, because I think that's where everybody's biggest questions are for this team, and understandably so. But we really don't know what we do and don't have from a stability standpoint. And I do personally wonder too, while we're sitting here wondering, why didn't the Dolphins go out and bring in guards? Why didn't they go out and get a bunch of guys to compete at guard? And they brought in Jack Driscoll. But there's a part of me that wonders, because the center is new, and this is a system that this team and this coaching staff, this football operation seems to genuinely believe that you have to build some sweat equity in it to really get how it works. If they didn't want new guys in the system, too many new guys starting next to one another. And there's, you saw that last year with miscommunications on front identifications and assignments, and linebackers getting run through and players stepping the wrong way. Lester Cotton at one point was blocking a guy on his own team. He was blocking Durham Smythe on the backside of an outside run. So you had all kinds of examples of that kind of stuff that kind of littered the film last year. I do wonder if that's something that they consider as being really valuable. I think if I gave you the chance to guess based off the title, you'd have said quarterback, and you'd probably have said some variation of the offensive line. Maybe I surprised you with my answer. The last group might surprise you. We're going to get into that after the break. Make sure you stick with us. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those that aren't actively looking for a job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your jobs for free. Terms and conditions do apply. The third group for me is the secondary group, particularly the cornerback group. If you told me you could get one position group on the rest of the roster, you might think I'd say edge. You might think I'd say defensive interior. You might think I'd say tight end with Jonnu Smith, right? But I think you look at running back, and I think the depth is better. I think you look at wide receiver, and while you acknowledge that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle is one of the pillar identity pieces of this roster, I do think they've done a better job with Odell Beckham. I think there's more ways you can have ancillary answers even without one of those guys on the field. They really platoon those guys at a pretty high rate anyway. I think you look at the edge group, the depth is already going to be tested. I know some people wanted the Dolphins to sign both Emmanuel Ogbah and Yannick Ngakoue. I think that'd be a little bit of overkill. But you consider they brought in Calais Campbell. They've now brought back Emmanuel Ogbah on a one-year deal. We'll talk about that in just a minute. They drafted two guys. I think they certainly have enough bodies in addition to your star players at the position that you're okay from a depth perspective there. I think they're going to platoon the defensive interior anyway, regardless. I think they have some modest depth at safety and linebacker. Corner's the one for me that it's not that I don't think you have interesting depth. It's, I think, the identity of this defense being a simulated pressure defense, being a team that is going to be a little bit more aggressive. You're anticipating with blitzes, not just the zone match stuff that was so prominent with Fangio last year. I think that the next best value of the good of the team, especially if you're getting, I'm signing on the dotted line, making the deal with the devil right now. I get Tua for the full season, and I get the interior offensive line stability throughout the course of the season. Getting one on the defensive side of the ball, I think would certainly be helpful. And considering Jalen Ramsey and Kendall Fuller and Cam Smith and Kader Kohu, that group, like I would love to see what consistency in that group can breed for you, because if the communication's on point in the back end, it opens up a lot of what you can send on the front end. And you saw the miscommunications on the back end for this team and this defense last year when they had their bad performances, whether that was the long touchdown by CeeDee Lamb, whether that was the entirety of the Baltimore game, whether that was the entirety of the Buffalo game. It was breakdowns on the back end that allowed that to happen. I think about the critical plays Miami missed defensively against Philadelphia. And you consider they didn't have Jalen Ramsey or Xavier Howard for that game. They didn't have either one of those guys. So to have Ramsey, Fuller, Cam Smith, Kohu have that core four be like your core four guys that are taking snaps at corner. And if you told me I could get that for the season, and there's a lot of trust and cohesion there with that group, I think that would do a lot of heavy lifting for Miami, because I think they have enough depth and other ancillary pieces to make the rest of it go. But I think that's the core and the strength and the pillar of the depth chart on that side of the ball. So that's what I would sign on the dotted line for and say, I'm going to let the rest of the chips fall where they may. We'll be with whatever adversity we get in the other position groups along the way. But if you told me you got those three things, those would be the three health developments for me that I think could make this Dolphins season be one that we're all hoping that it can and should be. Now, we talked about the depth at edge. The Dolphins got a little bit more with Emmanuel Ogbah. I know we did the show yesterday. We did the show over the weekend about the names that I had. Ogbah wasn't on the list. It was reported by Drew Rosenhaus that Ogbah and Yannick Ngakoue were both coming in for a workout yesterday. Came out this morning, 8 o'clock. I think it was Cam Wolf had it first. Ogbah signs a one-year deal worth up to $5 million with the team. Okay, it's not the choice that I would have made, but I also do wonder if there was an economic piece of this puzzle that kind of nudged you in this direction. For example, Yannick Ngakoue kind of has developed the reputation of being a pass rush mercenary that comes team to team. The past two seasons prior to 2023, he played for $13 million in cash each season. He had $13 million collected cash from Indianapolis and was it the Raiders? And then in 2023, he played for $10 million in Chicago, almost $10.5 million. So Ogbah signs his deal for up to $5 million. Right, that I would be inclined to think probably 50% of that, if not more, is incentive based for performances and production. I don't think you had that kind of flexibility with Ngakoue. And if the Dolphins feel like Phillips or Chubb will be back on a reasonable timeline, not over investing in a guy that's going to end up not being a primary snap taker, you can kind of understand what the thought process is there. So I'm sure there were a couple of variables beyond just who's the better player, right? Because I personally think, and we'll need to see what their utilization is, what their fronts look like, and how they use these guys. And they're very different skills for both of them. And we went over that yesterday on the show. If it's just, the question is just who's the better player, it's Ngakoue. Right, he's got almost 70 career sacks. He's probably going to finish his career pushing towards 100 sacks. Like, he's 29 years old. He's at 69. He has 30 to get to triple digits. If he gets 7 sacks a season for the next 4 seasons, he'll be 33 years old and knocking on the door of 100 sacks. Like, I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility for Yannick Ngakoue. So I think it's a little telling that Miami signed the deal for up to $5 million. We'll wait for the details to figure out exactly where it's at. But Barrett was a base value of close to $7 million with incentives up to $9 million. So from a financial perspective, this pendulum does kind of swing you towards a little bit more in the way of savings. And we'll see if they put a void year on the back end of it or whatever to manipulate the salary cap for this year upcoming. So there's some unanswered questions there, but we do know their decision was to sign Emmanuel Ogbah, familiar face, back to potentially kind of take some of the Calais Campbell type snaps and rolls, be that insider on the edge. So you get a little bit more depth with that archetype of player. The NFL, it came out this morning, is continuing to hint at expanding the NFL season. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we are on the cusp of news coming out of Miami Gardens with training camp. That's next year on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. The summer is a bit of a dearth in the way of sports, and thankfully training camp is back, but not a lot of odds on training camp if you're interested in getting into the game. FanDuel lets you keep the sports going all summer long. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking all customers up with a boost or bonus daily. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com to start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. It's not even just the fact that the team is, or that the league is hinting at an 18-game season. It's more the timeline that's interesting to me. The NFL and NFLPA, according to Mark Mask with the Washington Post, have started high-level discussions. This is from Ari Meinhof, a.k.a. at My Sports Update on X. The NFL and NFLPA have started high-level discussions about potentially implementing an 18-game regular season, according to Mark Mask. NFLPA Executive Director Lloyd Howell left the door open that an agreement could be reached before the current collective bargaining agreement expires. That's what's really interesting to me, because usually sweeping changes like this require getting roped into negotiations for a new collective bargaining agreement. And that happens about once every decade, where the Players Association and the owners sit down and they look at everything structurally for the league, and they update the bylaws, and they update the roster rules, and they update the player benefits, and they update the schedule, right? And for them to say, hey, this could potentially get done before we need to sit down and do the next collective bargaining agreement is really fascinating. And I believe it was Joe Burrow went on Pardon My Take not that long ago and talked about an 18-game season and said, a second bye week as a part of that. So you're potentially looking at extending the league even longer, an even longer run time of the league's regular season, potentially pushing the Super Bowl out to a holiday weekend, which I don't think anybody would be mad about. So there's a lot of really interesting high-level discussions that have to take place for that to happen. But as the NFL, if you haven't been following along, they did get popped with a lawsuit involving NFL Sunday Ticket as far as the exclusivity of that and how they overcharged and didn't allow individual market offerings. And it ended up being like a several billion-dollar suit that the NFL plans to contest. But if they are unsuccessful in contesting that and going through the appeals courts, the owners could be on the hook for like several $100 million that they need to end up paying back into this suit to pay the customers of Sunday Ticket from like a 10-year window to from like 2011 to 2020 or whatever it was. I wonder how much there's an incentive to get this on the books before something like that has to go through the courts and the appeal process. A potential bill comes due, could be several years from now. But the way that you tie this back to Miami is if each owner has to write a check, and the Packers are publicly owned, and the way that that's important and valuable is they have to make all of their financial documents public. And what every team would have to pay back in this lawsuit, if they go through the appeals process, they ultimately lose the case, they would have to pay back approximately the amount of money that every team was given as far as their revenue share from this past season. And there would be salary cap implications for that. And as the Dolphins, as a team that is negotiating a quarterback contract that's going to involve significant amount of guaranteed money, a wide receiver contract in Jalen Waddle that just got done a contract extension that's pushing closer to the expiration of the CBA at the end of this decade. It is just interesting to know that on the horizon from a business perspective for the league, there is kind of this black cloud that lingers. And I wonder how much of the motivation to expedite getting an 18th game before you have to do a new collective bargaining agreement is contingencies to get more ticket revenue and merchandise revenue and television revenue from having an extra game in the regular season that all 32 teams would play. And is that part of your protections, right? And to tie this all back to Miami and the ongoing situation that they have with their quarterback contract negotiations, if a bill were to come due for every team, and there are salary cap implications, the more flexibility you could have in that window, the better. I think back to the COVID pandemic in 2020 and what that did for the salary cap in 2021. The salary cap, there was a lack of growth, and that forced the Dolphins to move on from some players like a Kyle Van Noy, like an Eric Flowers, and the value of those players versus their contracts, it could be up for discussion and debate about whether they lived up to their contracts or not. But nevertheless, Miami started to build and had to pivot and make some pretty significant cuts after 1 year because of the salary cap implications, because there were no ticket sales to be shared as far as a revenue perspective. All that to say, if I were the Dolphins and you are committed to this quarterback, having this year be the first year of guaranteed money to ensure that as the Sunday ticket suit goes through the courts, if you go through that process for as long as you can and the bill comes due, you want to not have guaranteed money on as many contracts as possible to be able to readjust your books if there's a significant impact for the salary cap. It's another motivation, I think, for Miami. If they're going to pay Tua, get it done so that this year can be kind of the start and influx of the guaranteed money in a new contract instead of playing out this year. And then next year's the first year, and that pushes guaranteed money out if it's 3 years worth of guaranteed salary. Now you're looking at a 4-year window of guaranteed salary where if you paid him now and you gave him the raise this year, it could be 3 years of guaranteed salary and it starts a year earlier. So just a lot of really fascinating business layers that this lawsuit for Sunday Ticket has the potential and looms over the league as something that could be a really nasty hiccup for revenue share and the salary cap perspective. So hearing that they're taking the 18th game very seriously in the shadow of that is just a storyline to watch long term. That's going to do it for us on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Dolphins players reporting to camp, undergoing conditioning tests today. Mike McDaniel's first availability is tomorrow. We have some players coming today as well. So we'll get some quotes. Look forward to hearing from them. Look forward to the team hitting the practice field. I will be at practice this week. And for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be in Miami Gardens. I'm traveling very shortly after I finish recording here. And we'll get after it. And I'll be there every step of the way. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys for checking out the show. Talk to y'all soon. Go Dolphins.